Is this the end of tax-free municipal bonds? And what might you want to do as a potential muni bond investor? Hello, members, super savers, and bond course fans. I hope you're healthy and well. As our Diamond NestEgg regulars know, municipal bonds, or munis for short, are often seen as attractive fixed income investments because the interest earned on these types of bonds may be exempt from federal, state, and local income taxes. This can sound attractive to many, and particularly so if you're in a high marginal tax bracket. But are munis about to lose their tax-exempt status? That was a question that we received from Lou B in our most recent Bond Masters live course session. And we found this one so potentially disconcerting, especially given how many of you in our community hold munis as part of your overall portfolio, that we decided to dive a bit deeper into this. Bond beginners, folks, please refer to Module 9 on municipal bonds if you need a refresher. And if you're not in our bond courses, I've also linked these Intro to Muni videos in the first pinned comment below for your convenience. So, it's interesting to note that the tax exemption for municipal bonds has been put into question a few times before. But there's a strong lobby backing it as well, and it's no different this time. While the debate still seems to be in its early stages, stakeholders who would be directly impacted by any change have already begun to make their displeasure known and to drum up support for keeping munis tax exempt. As you can see from this headline from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Protecting Tax Exemption for Municipal Bonds, as well as this one from the National Association of Counties, oppose efforts to eliminate or limit the tax-exempt status of municipal bonds. And with that in mind, here are the three topics that we'll be covering in today's video. 1. Where does the discussion about the tax exemption of municipal bonds come from? 2. What is the status of the current discussion on getting rid of tax-free munis? And 3. What might you want to do now as a muni investor? As usual, here's our front of video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. Let's dive in now, folks. Where does the discussion about the tax exemption of municipal bonds come from? As we discussed in previous videos, Congress has started to talk about a tax reform bill aimed at implementing the promises that President Trump made on the campaign trail, including the extension of the current tax cuts and the elimination of income tax on Social Security, overtime, and tips. Again, meaning gratuities, not the Treasury inflation-protected securities or tips that we often discuss on this channel, unfortunately. So, fulfilling all these tax cut promises would cost a lot of money that the government doesn't have. So what lawmakers and the current administration have to do is to look at potential sources of savings and additional revenue to compensate for the lost revenue, at least to a certain degree. And a good starting point when you need more revenue is to look at where most of the money is going at the moment. And the first lists have been circulating. This one here, for example, shows the top tax expenditures from special tax privileges or legal tax loopholes, if you like, and how much money they currently cost the federal taxpayer. And yes, the exclusion of interest on state and local bonds, the tax-exempt status of muni bonds, does have a more or less prominent place on the list. Here it shows that the tax-free status of munis costs the Treasury $25 billion a year, enough for it to be ranked as number 15. To be honest, I had actually expected this number to be even larger, given that there are currently about $3.8 trillion in munis outstanding. In any case, because munis regularly appear on these tax expenditures lists, taking away their tax exemption has been discussed before. In fact, eliminating the tax-exempt status of municipal bonds was first entertained by President Obama's National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform in 2010. Now, nothing happened in 2010, but the topic came up again in 2017 during President Trump's first administration for his Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And while the core tax exemption for munis stayed intact back then, they made it a bit narrower, and the tax-exempt status of advanced refunding bonds was eliminated under this law. What this means is that if a municipality issues a new bond that is meant to refinance an outstanding muni before it becomes due, it cannot claim the tax exemption on both bonds at the same time. So the new bond is not tax exempt. No one likes losing a tax exemption, but this specific loss doesn't exactly sound like undue hardship. Claiming two tax exemptions at the same time and on the same financing need can sound a bit like double dipping anyway. And what's more, municipal bond issuers can still refinance a maturing tax-exempt muni with a new tax-exempt muni. They just have to wait until the old one actually matures. So it doesn't seem like the 2017 restriction has caused too much turbulence in the muni market over the past 7 years or so, or at least nothing substantial that's come to our attention. So, to summarize, despite being a previously discussed target for potential extra revenue under both Democrat and Republican administrations, there were zero changes to the tax exemption on munis in 2010 during the Obama administration, and only some minor changes in 2017 during the first Trump administration, meaning not much has changed despite all the talk. Now, let's fast forward to 2025 and the second Trump administration. What is the status of the current discussion on getting rid of tax-free munis? So, given that the tax-free status of munis does show up with a number 15 ranking on this tax expenditures list, and that it does cost us $25 billion a year, as I showed you earlier, it's not surprising that the tax exemption on munis is once again being raised as a potential savings opportunity for the current tax reform bill. Now, we could not find any more information on where the discussion in Congress stands exactly at the time of this taping, except that the House Budget Committee Republicans have identified eliminating the federal tax exclusion for interest earned on municipal bonds, or muni bonds, as a large potential revenue raiser, as we already discussed. Here are 3 additional observations from industry experts on this topic, though, from AllianceBernstein, a well-respected research firm to be precise. First, don't expect the tax exemption on munis to go away completely. It might just not be worth enough to face down the considerable opposition that has already been forming, as we talked about at the beginning. Second, be prepared that the tax exemption for munis could be made narrower, for example, by making private activity and not-for-profit tax-exempt muni bonds fully taxable. We won't go into the details here, but such a move would basically restrict the tax exemption more narrowly to classic muni bonds that finance government-funded infrastructure projects, such as roads or public schools, but take the tax exemption away for bonds that also involve the private sector or certain independent nonprofit organizations, such as private schools. Third, you can probably expect that any targeted elimination would affect future issues only, as was the case for pre-funded bonds in 2017. This means that all bonds issued before the new law goes into effect would keep their tax-exempt status for life. They would be grandfathered, so to speak, and only new bonds issued after the deadline would be taxed, which is a nice segue into the next section of today's video. What might you want to do now as a muni investor? So, here are my personal thoughts regarding the risk of munis losing their tax exemption. First, don't panic. I know I sound like a broken record to our Diamond NestEgg regulars, but I can't repeat this often enough in times like these. When in doubt, panicking is almost never the right option, regardless of whether that has to do with your money or anything else in life for that matter. Second, if you hold munis or are currently dollar cost averaging into them, continue doing so unless your fundamental conviction has changed. In my mind, based on the sources we've shared earlier, the likelihood that the tax exemption will go away on any munis that are already issued or will be issued before any new law goes into effect seems to be reasonably small. In similar situations in the past, existing bonds have generally been grandfathered into the old rules, meaning they kept their tax exemption for life. Third, if you've been thinking of growing your muni fixed income allocation in your portfolio, you might want to consider locking in the current tax-exempt munis for a longer term if that suits your risk appetite, circumstances, and preferences. In fact, if I were a betting type of girl, I'm not, because Marcus doesn't like casinos, so no road trips to Vegas for us. But if I were a betting type of girl, I might even be tempted to buy a few more munis now of the types that could potentially lose their tax exemption, because there may be a not unreasonable chance that they could go up in value if demand stays strong but supply decreases. Or, as municipalbonds.com puts it, a bit more indirectly, many pundits estimate that already issued bonds would be grandfathered in, providing existing tailwinds to their demand amid the shrinking supply. But like I said, that veers more in the direction of trading on market signals rather than long-term investing, as you'll need to sell those municipal bonds before maturity if you want to cash in on any price gains in the secondary market. So, if you're a hold to maturity type of bond investor, like many in our Diamond NestEgg community are, this may not be the direction that you want to go. And as I just said, I personally won't go into this type of speculation here either at the moment. All right, members, super savers, and bond course fans, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. And as always, if you want to learn more about treasuries, munis, and bond investing in general, then check out this video here on our bond courses. And come join our next live member Q&A on Sunday, March 23rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time. We'll be diving deeper into this month's 2, 5, and 7-year Treasury auctions and all things fixed income. I've also linked all the details on our bond courses and YouTube Super Saver membership below this video for your convenience. See you again very soon with more brand new wealth building content for your financial journey.